So on an average, we saw a 57%, almost 57% of full-time employees bring in their own personal smartphone or tablet to access corporate data. And there are many, many of these kind of statistics, but if you see the chart on the right, it says that almost half of the employers encourage bringing these personal devices into their scenario. But there's a significant portion of employers that choose to become the so-called ostrich IT, where they choose to ignore that it's happening, that their employees are bringing in their devices. They choose to wait until there is a significant amount of security breach that triggers them to start thinking about building a mobile strategy. So there are different things that go into this kind of mobility that we have seen. Either if some of the employers are proactive and they want to enable their users to become mobile always, not mobile first, not mobile only, but mobile always as needed. But there are also a significant number of employers that, if you see the pie, it's almost more than half of the employers that we've surveyed chose not to either encourage it or don't want to do it, or chose to ignore it. I will wait for until the slide refresh.
What are
Yeah.
you seeing? I think everybody's mobile nowadays. I mean, what are you seeing in your customer base as far as, the percentage of adoption of, does it coincide with what the pie chart is here? Or, I mean, to me, everyone I know has two, three devices. I've gone around and spoke a few times, and recently on MDM, and I asked a question: how many of you guys have three devices with you? And 90% of the room raises their hand. I carry four devices
Um,
with me, and I only use one of them.
I agree with that, but I think this pie chart or this survey is more from the IT admin perspective. So that's where the employees definitely, yes, they bring in as many devices as they want. Whether or not there is a formal BYOD initiative, they will definitely use their device to access the corporate data, at least email, if nothing else, at least email. And these days, it's more easier to access corporate data like Dropbox. I use Evernote or Dropbox for any sensitive information as well. So employees are definitely doing that, but from an employer perspective, about less than half of them are encouraging it or actively pursuing or building the mobile strategy, the right mobile tools to enable their users. There's a smaller portion that discourages it, not because of the employer, but probably because of the industry they're in or the region they're in that limits them from enabling these kind of policies. So there was a Latin American customer that I was recently talking to that did not want to have any mobile devices come in, or that did not want to issue any corporate-owned devices either to their employees, because if the employee even checks the email, or if the employee does even a single task, finishes a complete single task after the business hours, they're obligated to pay overtime. So this particular customer did not want to get into those kind of issues of accounting or keeping track of who's working overtime or outside of the business hours. So they definitely discouraged this BYOD concept itself. So
Interesting.
there are a lot of other reasons that play into why they discourage it, but don't know about it or ignore that it's happening is where we see a lot of security issues or these kind of user productivity issues, where they bring it in, the employer either chooses not to support it or does not chooses to ignore it. Users do it anyway, and when there's a security breach, that's when the IT or the enterprise wakes up and, oh, now we have to tackle this. Now we are being reactive instead of being proactive.
Exactly, and that's you brought up a couple things I want to chat about throughout this. Sometime during this session, things like Evernote and Dropbox, and the overtime issues is something very interesting too. I never knew that companies had to pay you for overtime. I think Citrix owes me like $1 million. So, I mean, I love to work, so I guess I got to call my boss and tell him he owes me some more money. So I'll let you continue, though, please.
Sure. So what we have seen there's a lot of conversations around mobility, enterprise mobility, MDM, MAM. So the four kind of broader topics are the concerns that we have constantly heard from our customers in these past few years, more than a couple of years, is the first and foremost thing these days is the data protection. How do I protect my data? I don't want to focus solely on device management anymore, because even if I own the device, I can't really protect the entire device or control the actions of the user on the device. So how do I protect the data? How do I protect the information that's being accessed on that device and through an app? How do I do that? And that's like the biggest concern that we have seen in our customers. And alongside, does not take really a second priority or anything, but alongside we have also seen how do we deliver consumer-like experience while protecting the data. So those two challenges or concerns go pretty much hand in hand, because we don't want to affect the native user experience delivered by the devices themselves. At the same time, we don't want to compromise the information security. So how do we bring that best of both worlds kind of scenario for our users? And the next set of challenges that we've seen are along how to separate the enterprise data from the employee's personal data. So even if I own the device, so even as an enterprise IT, if I own the device and I give my device to my users, as soon as, let's go with an iPad, I give my users an iPad, they are still going to take pictures of their kids, they're still going to take videos of their kids' shows, they are still going to download a bunch of personal apps, and they're going to use it even for personal. So whether or not I own the device, whether or not I manage the device as an enterprise IT, I still have to make sure that the relevant information is always protected. And even though I manage the device, even if I want to care about what else is going on the device, I honestly want to protect what matters to me. So how do I do that? How do I separate my enterprise data from the employee's personal data so that if needed, I can remotely wipe just that portion of the data that matters to me, or if the device is lost, I can completely wipe it. So the device ownership, again, is slowly becoming irrelevant, and the conversation is more shifting towards the information protection kind of aspect. And the last aspect is definitely the key, because it brings up the mobile productivity kind of discussion. So it's not one single mobile application that enables mobile productivity. It's an ecosystem of applications. It's a group of applications that help our users be productive from their smartphone. So as an enterprise IT, how do I bring that ecosystem of applications to my users? One is I either take off-the-shelf apps and customize it, or I build a homegrown app. So when I take the either approach or either route, I want my app developers or my app developer partners to focus on the app development part. I don't want them to focus or get bogged down by the security aspects of it, because that will drive their focus away from building the best app for my users. So I want my app developers to focus on the app functionality itself, and I will work with the industry-leading security vendors to bring the security aspect into the app itself. So these are like the major four areas of concerns, or major four topics that we constantly hear. There's a few others, but these are like the top priorities or top concerns and challenges that we constantly hear from our customers. Doug, do you or anyone from the audience have any other thoughts or questions to add here?
I don't. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with the four the four bullets, so to speak. Uh, yeah. Anybody out there have any questions about that? Not, please. I mean, I have tons of questions, but I want you to keep moving on, and then I'll ask in a little bit.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So I'll just build this whole slide out. The mobile discussion, as we said, has evolved into mobilizing information. So initially we were talking about mobilizing people, where we bring in the devices and we make them mobile workers so that they can work, they can be productive, they can have flexible access of information from anywhere, any device, kind of any model. And then we are at a stage right now where we're trying to mobilize the business itself. Like, what are our different processes? What are different functionalities that we constantly use? And how can our mobile users use those to be more effective or efficient from a mobile device? Instead of asking, for example, my sales folks to log into Salesforce or to VPN in and then log into Salesforce, then jot down all their notes after each and every conversation that they have when they are on the road, how can I build an app that sits on their device, whether it's corporate owned or personally owned, and how can I make sure that all the information or all the data that's being captured in that application is secure, at the same time easier for my sales guys to access, so that it's when they sit in the car after they're done with their customer meeting, they launch the app, they plug in all the information that they want, they type it in, and boom, that's done, and that synchronizes on the back end with their Salesforce.com. So how do we bring that mobility aspect for the business itself? And then we have this mobilizing information. That's where we're all headed towards, where we want real-time data access. We want collaboration, real-time collaboration from a mobile perspective. Device does not matter, application does not matter, the user does not matter, network does not matter. What matters the most is the information. We want constant and real-time access for that information from a user perspective, and from an enterprise perspective, we want to provide that access. At the same time, we want to have the utmost security on that part of the information as needed. So the evolution, we have seen a lot of customers in one or all three of these stages, but that's where we are kind of moving towards mobilizing the businesses and information. Yesterday it was all about mobilizing people. How do I manage my devices? How can I be tactical or reactive to these changes in the workspace? But today and tomorrow we are being more proactive. How can I use this mobile kind of opportunity for a revenue generating opportunity? How can I become more competitive and much more appealing kind of an employer for my employees?
Hey, Swarna, I have a quick question from the audience. Where do most customers usually start? Device, app, or anything else?
Any customer that we have already seen that is in the mobile discussion has traditionally started with devices. So it was all about being reactive and how they can manage the devices and protect the devices. And now that they either don't want to manage those or choose not to manage those anymore, they are moving towards mobilizing the business and information kind of aspects. But any enterprises that we see is now considering a mobile solution. If they're starting afresh all over, or finally they want to have a mobile strategy, we see that they either have a little bit of both, like mobilizing, like being a reactive or a proactive kind of solution. They look at both, but they are definitely focusing on more of the strategic level on how I can use this as a revenue generating opportunity for me. How can I keep my users productive? So most of the customers that we see today are in the second and third topics of discussion.
Now, you also hear a lot of buzzwords in the industry like MDM and MAM, and you and I both love to talk about those so much, don't we? Where do those type of technology fit into this?
I would say the MDM would fit into the first aspect, mobilizing people, because it was all reactive and people just reacted to these devices coming into the corporate setting, and how do I protect the information that's going on, or how do I manage the devices. Mobile application management, I think, definitely falls into the second and also into the third, because it's not about the device anymore. I want to create an application for my users to become even more efficient when they're mobile. So how do I build the application? At the same time, how do I protect the information that is being now mobilized within the application? So MAM and also Mobile Information Management, if you want to come up with another acronym, are the two of the recent or more prevalent concepts these days, because it's all about the information that is being accessed by the application. So those two would fall under the second and third.
You bet. And you and I've had a bit of conversation about MAM, MDM versus each other, what they are, where they fit, on Twitter. And then we did a podcast together and talked about it. Okay, just real briefly, can you just sort of give your 2 cents on what you think of MDM versus MAM or what have you?
Sure. So I think MDM is still strong, and we definitely cannot say that MDM is dead. But when we say MDM is dead, it's dead as a standalone product. So if I am, as an enterprise IT, if I'm looking for a mobile solution, I should not be looking at an MDM solution, because that is not going to help me with everything. MDM products are not security solutions. They are not going to protect my information that's being accessed on these. They're more like, they are mobile device management solutions. So they manage the devices. You can manage the mobile devices, but not really protect the information that goes on there. And that's where I think application management and application protection comes into picture, where MDM functionality becomes a feature subset of the MAM products itself. So at the end of the day, we're all trying to protect the information, and the MAM kind of technologies will or should have the device management capabilities as a subset of their functionality, so that if needed, if the enterprise IT chooses to manage certain devices, they can, but the focus is always on protecting the information that's within the applications.
You bet. I so agree with that. And that's basically was our discussion, is that any good any good mobile solution has both of them built in. But, one of the issues we have with mobile management in today's world, and please correct me if I'm wrong or if you feel like I'm gone astray, is that users, they own their devices, or they think they do. And the last thing they want us to do is come in and lock them down and restrict access to things that they're accustomed to, that they want to, that they demand and they feel that they deserve, right? And when we use something like a MDM solution only, or heavily on the MDM side, you start restricting that typical behavior of a user. Where MDM, like you said, is managing the work, the data, managing the application, and managing the security around that. So it just seems like that's the way to go.
Yep, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more on the user experience aspect. If you start locking down the applications that they can access, or if you start locking down the device functionality itself, it's so counterproductive for users, especially when it is in the mobile setting. In traditional devices like PCs or laptops, probably we could have done that, but with smartphones and tablets, there's probably no way, because if you start locking down the device and block certain applications, there's going to be another application that can be used as a substitute for the ones that you just blocked. So on smartphones and tablets, there's no possible way for us to keep locking it down, or keep holding the devices down to only enable certain aspects or certain apps. And that's where I think protecting the information and securing the information that's being accessed becomes even more critical for us.
You bet. Totally agree. Well, I'll let you continue.
Okay. As soon as I find my mouse. All right. So these are some of the initiatives that we've seen in mobilizing the people, mobilizing the business, and the next slide goes on mobilizing information. So when we think of, as an enterprise IT, when I'm thinking of being reactive, now I'm trying to provide mobile email to my users because they already have brought in their devices. I need to give some kind of sync and share tools for them. I need to accommodate my contingent workforce. I need to make sure that I have the right user authentication access control policies on the device, password, basic passcode kind of protection. So these are certain things that we address, or we keep in mind when we go with being reactive. When we switch to mobilizing business, there's real-time data collection, real-time coding and collaboration or configuration, and there's this data that's hooked to the backend applications onto these mobile devices. With the Salesforce example that I just gave, it's about using the front end or using the device as a front end to access our corporate information that's sitting on the, behind the firewall. How do we use this as our access point for our net sensitive information, our confidential information that's sitting behind the firewall? So that's pretty much what we have to think of when it comes to mobilizing business. And information is regardless of the device, regardless of the location, as I said, any, regardless of all of these things, how do we secure the applications and how do we secure, more importantly, the data that's sitting on the device that's being accessed on through the application? So how do we enable certain kind of copy-paste restrictions, or how do we restrict certain actions that the users can take within the application on the data? For example, if I have the Salesforce, let's still go with the Salesforce example. I have uploaded some sensitive email conversations, and I also have noted down certain sensitive touch points for my account. I don't want that to be copied and pasted into, let's say, my Evernote, which might not be an authorized application given by my enterprise IT. And with all these Dropbox or Evernote security breaches that we've seen, when that happens, if I had captured my notes on Evernote, and when that security breach happens, that obviously poses a significant risk for the sensitive information that we have. As a sales guy, I hold that information or that piece of information as pretty confidential and sensitive for my account. So how do I not let that Evernote kind of security breaches affect my data, and how do I protect the information? So that's pretty critical for enterprise IT, regardless of the device, regardless of the app, protecting the data that resides on the device.
You bet, and that's something that's something I actually wrote down. You had mentioned Evernote and Dropbox to begin with, and there's this idea of this personal cloud that's going on nowadays that that we all have, right? You have the hybrid cloud and the private cloud and the public cloud, but then yet we all have this personal cloud that we carry around with us. It's on our iPhones, our iPads, our Androids, our Macs, our laptops. And all that data is coming in and out, and some of that's it's real easy for us to take something like a corporate document and stick it up in Dropbox. We don't necessarily mean to do it per se, but maybe it allows us to do our job better. What are you hearing from your customers out there? What are you hearing from the industry about that, about this personal cloud, and what people are they scared of it, or what are you hearing about all this?
Um, Definitely a significant amount of concern from our customers. So, for example, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and the most secure aspect of note-taking was provided by the conference organizers, a pen and paper on the table. It was a mobile conference, and we had a piece of pen and paper on each table for each attendee to take notes. So that struck a conversation among our Twitter group that was there, that compare that with Evernote. Now I'm here in a meeting, I'm taking all my notes on Evernote, and if my enterprise says that Evernote is not an authorized application, okay, fine, I don't want to use Evernote because it's not authorized, but if I don't get an alternative application which I can use to perform the same job function or same task that I want to do when I am on the road and I can be more effective, if I don't get an alternative application to use instead of Evernote, I might continue using Evernote because it helps me make my job easier. It helps me get my job done. So most of the enterprises, especially the ones that are ahead of the mobile curve, definitely have seen these kind of security breaches happen. And now they are taking a step back and building their application ecosystem itself where they have in-house applications or homegrown applications that act as substitutes for all these applications. Or they're working with Dropbox, Box, or Evernote to provide a custom version of that application for their enterprise specifically. So there are definitely a lot of customers that are actively pursuing these kind of tools to their users so that the users don't have to go around the IT and get their job done. But there are still a lot of enterprises that are either not there yet, not quite there yet, or not want to get there yet, which have users using these unauthorized applications either way.
Sounds good. I wanted to ask you what the alternative was, but you answered that along the way. So I love chatting with
Yeah.
you. You always answer my questions in advance.
That's because I have questions that come on your mind too. I have the same exact questions going on in my mind.
Got
All
it.
right. So the next one is what we've constantly heard from our customers. Mobile strategy has most times been so intimidating for our customers that they don't know where to start. Should we start at MDM? Should we start at MAM? Should we start at both? Like, where should we begin with? We already have these kind of virtualization solutions, so should we start extending that to mobile devices, or we have these security solutions, should we start extending that to mobile devices? Where should the discussion start, or how should we start implementing this strategy once we have this in place? So some of the things that can complicate this building the strategy are thousands of new devices are launched every, I would have loved to say every year, but I think now, given the way Apple, Android, Samsung, Google, Samsung are announcing, I would say every month. There are tons of different platforms, different device form factors that are being launched every month or so often that the users start bringing in the brand new shiny device, just the way you mentioned, Doug, that you're waiting for your iPhone 5S. As soon as you get it, or if I had bought my iPhone 5S, the first thing I would love to do is use it as my primary device. And what would I want to do? Bring all my corporate applications onto that. So once you start limiting yourself as an enterprise IT, if you start limiting yourself to iOS only or Android only kind of shop, it gets harder. So how do we extend our capabilities or strengths to multiple platforms, multiple operating systems, or different types of devices? How do we extend these policies, security policies, across these platforms? We have the same group of users using the legacy devices, PCs and laptops, and now we have the same group of users using mobile devices. Their job role hasn't changed. So how do we define a security policy for their job role and just extend it automatically to the mobile devices without having to create a separate policy for their traditional device versus separate policy for their mobile device? So how do we do that? These are a lot of things that can complicate a mobile strategy implementation process. So some of the guiding principles that we have are, first of all, identify what are the use cases that you have in your organization and plan for multiple use cases. There's not going to be a bring your own device only or bring your own iOS only kind of option. You will have Apple devices, Android devices, Windows devices. So plan for these multiple use cases. Plan for providing device choice. Like once a while ago, I had heard, from a customer that, we provide BYOD. We are a pure BYOD shop as long as it's iOS. That's not pure BYOD if you restrict it to iOS. So provide the device choice to your users. And you, as an enterprise IT, work on establishing the policies or defining the policies for your users based on their job roles, based on these devices, on how you're now faced with this massive task of protecting the data across all of these. So once you start with these kind of guiding principles, it starts getting easier to build to implement a mobile strategy. And that's where Symantec comes into picture.
Well, perfect. So how does Symantec address this? Are you going to talk about that, or?
Yeah.
Well, perfect.
Yeah.
I'll be quiet.
That's this slide. So Symantec's solution is Mobile Management Suite. This suite is a combination of our MDM solution, our MAM solution, and our content management solution, and also our mobile security solution. So this, as of today, it's a combination of 4 different products. However, there's a unified platform that we're building that already has app management, device management, and content management capabilities built into it. So if you buy Mobile Management Suite within a single management console, you will be able to manage your applications, your content, and your mobile devices without having to jump back and forth between two different consoles. So the way I would look at this particular graphic is, if you have to restrict the copy-paste restriction, copy-paste kind of actions from a secure email, the two icons that we have, the one with the yellow border is the one that is wrapped with Symantec security policies, or it could be a native Symantec secure email. So if you want to restrict any actions from those secure Symantec wrapped apps outside of the unmanaged apps, you can definitely do that. You can also enforce policies to let the users or let those managed apps or wrapped apps go to certain applications or certain clouds and not really to other websites. There's a whole lot of not just actions on content, but also network policies, the Wi-Fi policies, email policies, device policies, everything. You can set it up. The actions itself, like who can do what, are about 200 permutations and combinations that we have. So it gets really granular on what you want your users to do and what you don't want your users to do. And there's these security policies that go for each of those user definitions that's completely customizable for you. And so this is our kind of solution overview. And these are the four, I would say, pillars. The first four ones, the user and app access, app and data protection, device management, and threat protection, are pretty much like the four pillars that we build our solution based on. First of all, it's when a user tries to access your data from the data center, you want to know who's accessing it. You want to know what application is trying to access it. So you have to authenticate the user and then provide access. Our Symantec App Center solution, which integrates with O3, our own web gateway solution, or even SiteMinder, SAML kind of, even LDAP kind of authentication sources, provides that seamless user authentication and single sign-on across all these managed applications. And once you provide that access, once you grant the access based on the authentication, how do you protect the application and data itself? So that is something that our App Center and Mobile Management Suite products do. You can wrap the application post-compile. There's no source code changes. Post-compile, you just wrap the application with all the security policies and provision it to your users. The one, I guess, the biggest thing for me here is the fact that why I'm so passionate about my product here is that as a product marketing person, if I can get my App Center tenant up and running with at least 3 applications that are fully secured and wrapped within half an hour, I think there's no other product that can do that today. So if a product marketing person can get that up and running in that short time, I can only imagine how fast it will be for an IT admin, for a real techie like you, Doug, to get it up and running. So probably it'll take a couple minutes. As I said, device management capabilities will not go away. So enterprises still have to keep in mind about the devices that we'll have to manage, we'll have to protect, or we'll have to either personally own or corporate own. So our Mobile Management Suite product also provides the device management capabilities, and we are also integrating the MDM functionality within the App Center platform itself, so that from the same console, you can manage all 3 of them, devices, applications, and content. The last piece of the product is Symantec Mobile Security, which is the malware protection product. It protects the Android and Windows mobile devices against the mobile malware. As one of our recent Symantec Internet Security Threat Reports, the ISTR report stated, about 25% of the malware was written exclusively for Android. And even of that 25% malware, most of that was written for productivity applications, that is business applications. to capture the user behavior, user patterns, and tamper with the sensitive information and take advantage of that. So our mobile security product provides malware protection for Android and Windows mobile devices. And today you see that the first three pillars or three aspects of the solution are integrated into our App Center platform. And you will only see a tighter integration between these three and also the mobile security integration into the same platform as we move forward.
Perfect. I have a couple questions for you, if you don't mind, real quick.
Yes.
What kind of data can be accessed? How does that work?
So within App Center, just the way we provide applications, we provision applications to our users. We can also upload documents, PDFs, Words, videos, spreadsheets, any kind of files into the App Center tenant itself. So when the user downloads the App Center agent on their device, they get the application center where they can see all the, it's pretty much like the enterprise app store, where they can see all the applications that they are allowed to access. And along with that, they also have a content center where they have all the documents that they can access. So once the user gets access to that content center, they can then take the document, kind of enable offline access to that, so that if, for example, a sales guy goes into a customer meeting and they don't have any Wi-Fi or LTE kind of connections on the devices, they can just use the document off of their smartphone or tablet.
Okie dokie. Fair enough. And this is a question that came from the audience, but I actually wrote down a similar question, so I like this one. You mentioned app wrapping, and you know in iOS 7, Apple's sort of changed that a bit. So the question is, as written from the audience, let me make sure I have it correct. What apps can be wrapped? Any? And how does this work with the Apple application approval process?
So for any homegrown app, we can wrap it today. For any off-the-shelf app, you would have to get approval or permission from the app publisher, app developer, to wrap their app. And even with iOS 7, we have support for iOS 7. We released it, I think, on day 4 or 5 of after iOS 7 was released. We can enable restrictions like restrict AirDrop or AirPrint, restrict the social media sharing, these kind of policies on iOS 7 as well. For now, the off-the-shelf apps would require, as I said, approval from the publisher or developer. And once you get the source code, you just upload it, select a bunch of policies that need to go into it, and once it's wrapped, you would submit for Apple's approval and then distribute it. If you want to have it distributed from the public app store, you would have to go through the Apple approval process. If not, you can just distribute it in your own enterprise app store as you would distribute any other homegrown app.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Please continue on.
Sure. I would like to quickly go over a few case studies that we have seen in our customers so far. So one of our airline customers, they approached us for one thing. They already had a pure play MDM solution in place. However, they wanted to replace their flight bags with iPads. And before they implemented our solution, so if you look at the top line, before they implemented our solution, they had to go through a really extensive, labor-intensive and time-intensive paper-based process. They would publish all the monthly flight information, and they would ship them to different airports, to about 327 regional airports that they had. And the shipping cost itself, as it states here, is over $100K per year. And the time that it takes to update these flight information manuals and ship it to that, it takes a lot of time. And all of these manuals were about 40 pounds per each pilot. So just imagine the amount that they spent in not only shipping, but also in the fuel consumption in those hundreds of flights that they had. So once they deployed our App Center product, they mobilized the application, and they had all electronic flight manuals, and they completely eliminated the shipping costs. Now it's a 2-pound iPad per pilot instead of a 40-pound suitcase per pilot. So they saved a ton of money on not only shipping, but also the fuel costs and also just time to market for them. As it was real-time flight manual updates for them. They didn't have to go through the whole shipping process anymore. So it was real-time, and it was saving time and money for them. I think they recovered their App Center time and money that they spent on this product within a few weeks, if I'm not wrong. The other case study is where we had a healthcare customer, Quest Diagnostics. They wanted to use our App Center for mobile application management. So their how Quest Diagnostics have their groups of workers separated is they have their lab clinicians who go from door to door collecting information, like for life insurance or these kind of policies. They go to the patient's house, they collect all the information. It was purely paper-based process. They would come back to the lab, have data entered, and then store that paper-based process in rows and rows of cabinets. This all took time. And the second use case that they also had was sales productivity. So their sales guys had all of these legacy applications on their traditional devices. So they had to mobilize not only the clinician side of it, but also the sales side of it. For the clinicians, they completely eliminated the paper-based process. They gave iPads for their lab clinicians. There were literally no data loss errors, data entry errors. There was zero time lag between data collection and data entry because it was all real time. And they saved a huge amount of effort from the clinician's perspective that they didn't have to come back to the lab and manually enter all the data into the electronic records. And the second case where it was about sales productivity was they had to implement about 1,500, they had to deploy 1,500 iPads in, I think, less than 4 weeks with 3 applications for those sales guys. So the sales productivity, they were amazed that App Center, they could do that with App Center, Symantec App Center. They could not only get App Center up and running, but also get those applications wrapped and deployed and distributed by the users to the users. And they had 0 support calls as well. As soon as they sent the instructions to download the agent for the users, the sales guys download the App Center agent on their iPad. They got it, boom, they're up and running from the 0th hour. They didn't have any support calls. So both from a sales productivity perspective and also clinical data collection perspective, it was a huge success story for Quest. I think we also have their video on our website. So the last case study that I would like to go through here is the mobile application and content management that one of our other hospitals wanted to do. Again, it was the same kind of paper-based healthcare system and data entry. There were a huge amount of data entry errors. The second case, though, was for their doctors and clinicians that use BlackBerry. So how do we distribute the electronic medical records information via these sensitive applications or via homegrown applications to the doctors so that they can access it? And these doctors not only work for that particular healthcare center, but also they work for a bunch of other hospitals. So they could not really go with an MDM solution because we can't have multiple device management profiles on our devices. So they went with the App Center and had these doctors just download the App Center agent on their device to access the healthcare records securely and go through multiple hospitals without any issues. So it was a huge success story for that as well. And I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. There's just one next step. Just go to our webpage and look at our products or look at our information. If you have any questions, as always, I am available over email or Twitter. Even the Twitter is the easier way to reach me.
Yeah, and definitely use the Twitter so that people like me can follow along. So I love following you, Swarna. I must confess I'm not a big reader of Twitter in the sense of I don't go back and spend an hour reading what everybody typed out during the day. But I have a handful of people that I do, and you're one of them. So, but on that note, we
Thank
have some more questions. So if you're ready, let's get to some of these. So, okay, I got to read these things, so bear with me. I'm getting old. I need glasses nowadays. It's a horrible thing. Um, what are some of the common use cases or scenarios when you see enterprise mobility management (EMM) space within the EMM space?
you. So the use cases that we have seen are apart from the ones that I've mentioned here as our case studies, we have seen contract workers where they are consultants or temporary contingent workforce, and they work for multiple employers, and they're not really tied down to us, or even channel partners that where we cannot control the devices, we cannot manage their devices, but we have to still provide access to our sensitive information. So that's pretty much a mobile application management kind of use case that we have seen. There are also both MAM and MDM kind of use cases in education sector where one of our education customers, they issued iPads for their students, and that was completely a device and application management kind of a use case. Whereas one of our other school district customers, they enabled the BYOD kind of aspect where the students could bring in their own devices. They would give these applications that have a time bomb attached to it so that after the quarter or semester is done, it will automatically revoke the access for the application or for the lesson plan or the lessons that have been given access to the students until then.
Sounds good. The next couple questions are BYO questions. So I love these. Question. Do you see more cases where users bring in their own devices, or are they rather handed out by the employer?
Um, as much as I would love to say that these are all BYODs increasing, I think both the use cases or both the initiatives are going in parallel. There are definitely a lot of enterprises that focus on BYOD, but there are also a lot of enterprises that focus on yet another acronym, COPE, COPE, where it's corporate-owned device, but it's personally enabled. So there is a lot of growing adoption even for the COPE model that we see. But again, regardless of the initiative or the model that the enterprises take, BYOD or COPE or choose your own device, come up with any acronym or any initiative, it all comes down to what is the end user trying to do with the device, what is the job that they're trying to do, and what does the enterprise IT wants to do? Like, how do they want to provision access to their users, and how do they want to secure the access?
You bet. And we had a statement from good old Rob Beekman. We see he's seeing more corporate enabled devices these days. That's interesting. That's good to see. Deployed instead. It says he continues on to say deployed instead of completely managed. Interesting.
Exactly. I think that's where the COPE model comes in, where it's more corporate-owned device, but it's personally enabled. And I love that model where if the device is lost or if the device is broken, as an end user myself, I'm not obligated. And I know there are certain people on Twitter that love to piggyback on the broken devices because I have my own fair share of broken iPhones in the past. If I break my iPhone, I am not responsible or obligated for that. I can just go to my IT and say, hey, I accidentally broke it. Can you replace it? So I love the corporate owned and personally enabled kind of model a lot more than BYOD.
And that would be different than the idea of BYO, where the company is actually saying, okay, here's $1,000, go out and buy a laptop, or here's $500, go buy your phone, right?
Yeah, yeah. There is still a fair mix of both the models. One of my friends works for a huge company. I will not name that, but huge company, and they follow a pure BYOD model where either they just let their employees bring in their own device, or they pay some kind of stipend for these devices that their users want to pick. So I don't see any problem with it. The only challenge that I see is when you give that kind of model and if the device is lost. So for example, if I'm traveling and my BYO device is lost or broken or stolen, who's responsible for providing me with a substitute device or substitute alternative now?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that gets a little more tougher question or tricky question to answer. If it's a corporate-owned device, I can just go to my local office there and have a substitute Mac or PC or tablet, anything issued. But if it's a BYO, it gets a little challenging to address those kind of situations. But again, there are corner cases.
You got it. So, another question from the audience: how do you see the impact of iOS 7 on app wrapping? I
So iOS 7, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I would, if I'll answer this question real, or give my 2 cents, and then I'll let you get the expert's view, yours. And I see that, the future is we're moving away from app wrapping, but not, just like anything, it's going to be around for quite some time. iOS 7, supports other methods now, and Android and Windows Phone will eventually, but I think you're going to see a combination of the two. Um,
Exactly, and that's where I was going too. So with iOS 7, I think we have a whole lot of functionality, enterprise-friendly functionality that has been enabled, that Apple has enabled. But I see a couple of concerns with that. So AirDrop, AirPrint kind of options are great content sharing mechanisms as a consumer user, but for enterprises, that brings in a significant amount of data loss points. Now I have more data leakage sources than I had before, and if I have to either enable or restrict those, I would have to install a device level profile, and I would have to restrict those things at the device level. I cannot do it at an app level. So I think that's where our App Center's importance or relevance even increases even a lot higher, because now with App Center you can enable those for unmanaged apps, but for managed apps you can restrict or enable on a per application level the advanced features of iOS 7. And also, I'm not sure if I would agree with the whole statement that app wrapping will become irrelevant or MAM will become irrelevant with iOS 7, because maybe in North America we see iOS as being the dominant OS that's preferred by a lot of employers, but outside of North America we have a lot of Android and Windows adoption, and there's still a BlackBerry adoption there somewhere. So
somewhere.
we have to, yeah, somewhere. So we have to consider multiple platforms. Yes, iOS 7 is great. It provides me a lot more enterprise level functionality than it had before. But if I have Android and Windows phones or Windows 8 kind of platforms as well, as an enterprise ID, I want to be able to provide consistent user experience, consistent security policies across the platforms. I don't want to focus on using Apple's here and then completely building something else. I mean, we can do that, but it's just not scalable across platforms. So you need to have, I guess that's why I feel that App Center's importance, Symantec App Center's importance grows even more, because we add our security policies or strengths on top of iOS 7 strengths, so that you can extend it to not just iOS 7, but also Android and Windows platforms.
You bet, you bet. It's interesting. When I was at Synergy and a couple conferences since then, and even when I was back home in Iowa visiting family, not last month. And anyway, so I paid very close attention to what type of phones people had, and if they didn't have them out, I asked them. And what I found was really interesting. All the business people, the salespeople, the executives, the business people, the people like you and I too, were basically on iPhones. And the techies, almost all of them had Androids. And I thought that was really, really interesting. Where a few years ago it was iPhones everywhere, and now you're starting to see a heck of a lot of Android out there, and that's here in the U.S.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Okay, we're a little bit over time, but we started a little bit late, and we like to run until we're out of questions. So I have a good question. I saved this one for last, and this came from actually a private message to me, and I had this question too. And well, we have a couple more popping in, but that is, so where do you see this stuff going? If you can, we can look into the Swarna crystal ball. What's the future look like?
Oh, the crystal ball.
I love this one.
Um, I know. Um, so there's two things that are coming up even a lot more these days. So from an enterprise mobility perspective, yes, it's the discussion is all moving towards protecting the information, whether we can do it at app level or device level. Yes, it's still the information that we're trying to protect. Uh, the one thing that I'm noticing recently is the wearable devices. How do they play into the enterprise mobile scenario? What if my users want to bring in their Google Glass? And what if they want to bring in their Samsung Gear or those kind of things? And as enterprise IT, now I have to even consider those wearables or biometrics, even with the 5S that you're waiting for, Doug. Um, how do I ensure that the biometrics also get included into my security policies or mobile strategy policies? That's, again, bring your own device has been there, but I guess now the device definition has changed to not just a smartphone or a tablet, but also to include wearable devices. That's
Interesting.
kind of one direction that it is going. On the other hand, that I also see the other trend that I see significantly is coming from a telco or carrier service provider, communication service provider perspective, where they want to make it easier, consistent, more consistent, and simpler for their enterprise customers. Like Samsung is working with a bunch of carriers to do that on their Samsung phones. So we'll see a lot more of that kind of, not really consolidation, but collaboration going on between multiple vendors, the mobile solution vendors, the device manufacturers, and communication service providers to bring what's the best for their customer, instead of saying, oh, I have this and you can buy this from someone else and you can buy that from someone else, and letting the customer figuring out what the potpourri will look like. We will see a lot more of us vendors itself working together to bring in a cohesive and simpler solution for the customers.
Interesting. I wanted to ask you the question. I don't know if we did this during the podcast. We probably did because it's always on my mind, and that is convergence. You always hear people. You even mentioned it briefly there, uh, but this idea that things are going to converge into one unified device or one Nirvana phone, as Citrix talks about, and I don't see that happening. Like you just mentioned, wearable devices. And what I see happening is that nowadays I don't have one device I take with me. I have four devices I take with me. And as soon as the iWatch comes out, or what have you, I would buy that because I'm an Apple guy now. I'm going to have now five devices I take with me. How do you see that playing into this whole mobile management, enterprise world?
Um, the, I think that's where as you said, convergence comes into picture, where these devices or these device manufacturers also add another layer of policy management for either the applications that they provide on those devices, or at a device level itself as an MDM kind of layer itself, to help us manage the applications or manage the content that's being accessed on those devices.
So if we're managing the content, it doesn't matter what the device is. We could have 1,000
Yeah,
devices.
but if it's Google Glass or Samsung Watch or even an iWatch, then the device manufacturer themselves have to add the additional layer of the policy management layer for us to even um, enforce those policies on those devices.
So the convergence is not really happening in the device. It would be happening more at the management layer, right?
Yes, yes.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okie dokie. I think that's all the questions I have. We're 11 minutes over, but we always go over on these podcasts. I love the Q&A piece. So if there's any other questions from you guys, please shoot it using the questions piece, or you can even private chat me, as a few have done. And on that, if not, then Swarna, I really appreciate your time. Well, we did record this podcast or this webinar, so we'll definitely get this thing up online. Like Swarna has up on the screen, if you have questions and you don't want to ask them publicly, please feel free to email her directly. And then, of course, follow her on Twitter. You can always follow me. I'm Douglas A. Brown on Twitter. And we love the followers. We love to chat with you guys about this stuff. This is what's happening in the world today, is mobility. And it's only getting more and more and more. And like Swarna kept mentioning, my iPhone 5S is on its way to my office right this second. So, in fact, it could be sitting outside waiting in a car for me to open up the door and say, come on in. So I'm going to go. I'm all excited. I told him, you can't go bang on the door. So it's actually my accountant, who's my father. My iPhone gets shipped to the corporate office, which is a horrible thing. So he has to drive the thing up to me. So usually bangs on the door, which is
Special
never.
delivery, Doug.
Do you like that?
For
Except for, yeah, it's sort of like Mr. Rogers, special delivery. But he doesn't wear that goofy little hat. I'll have to make that wear that goofy little hat. Okay, so guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode of DABCC Live. Like I said, we recorded it, so I'll get it up on DABCC within the next couple days, and we'll get this out to you guys. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend. If you have questions, please ask. And on that note, until next time, thank you so much for listening to DABCC Live.